What happens when a genius perfects his art and then disappears? This is the story of Aurelius Blackwood. He was the most celebrated sculptor of his generation. His hands could coax life from cold marble. His name was a promise of flawlessness. Then, 3 decades ago, at the zenith of his fame, he vanished. Blackwood retreated from the world, sealing himself away from all accolades. He became a ghost, a myth whispered in hushed galleries. His legacy was frozen in time, a collection of perfect masterpieces. The artist was gone, an enigma. A lone truck stops before iron gates choked with rust and ivy. A driver leaves a crate of supplies, clay, chisels, stone, and hurries away, never seeing the face within. This is Blackwood Manor. For 30 years, these gates have remained sealed. The estate is a sprawling Gothic fortress, designed not to keep the world out, but to keep its master in. It is a gilded cage where the pursuit of an impossible ideal could flourish, undisturbed by imperfection. The art of perfection. Its gardens are wild, its walls absorbing all sound into a profound silence. What obsession compels an artist to trade the world for a stone fortress? Blackwood's early work was the pinnacle of hyperrealism. His statues did not just resemble life, they seemed to breathe, their marble skin holding a warmth that defied nature. Inside his cage, whispers say he sought to transcend even that. He was chasing a perfection so absolute it bordered on the divine, or perhaps the monstrous. This drive to erase every flaw resonates in our age of curated realities, where we too forget the human cost of flawlessness. The silence from Blackwood Manor bred local legends. Some spoke of rhythmic tapping echoing through the woods on moonless nights. Others claimed to see a single light burning in the highest tower. Our own inquiry, led by art historian Dr. Eris Thorne, began when that silence was finally broken. A single, unexpected letter arrived. It was not a plea or an explanation, it was an invitation. Inside, there was no message, only a charcoal sketch of a hand, so exquisitely rendered, so terrifyingly perfect, it felt more real than flesh. What happens when a ghost reaches out from his tomb? How can cold stone feel so impossibly alive? Before the silence, Aurelius Blackwood was a titan. His early works, from the late 1980s, were not statues. They were flesh and sorrow rendered in Carrara marble. Imagine standing before The Watcher in 1991. The gallery is quiet, the air still. You feel a cool draft, yet the figure before you seems to radiate a faint, impossible warmth, its veins seeming to pulse. This was his undisputed gift. This gift was a terrifying obsession with perfection. He was a devotee of divine proportion, the golden ratio governing patterns of life. Every curve, every plane, every eyelash was calculated to a fraction of a millimeter, adhering to a mathematical purity that felt almost inhuman. He wasn't just sculpting a likeness. He was attempting to capture the very formula of existence, the blueprint of a soul. But when perfection is achieved through such rigid, obsessive logic, does the art not lose its very humanity? His pursuit is a chilling mirror to our modern anxieties. We see its echo in the digitally smoothed faces on our screens and the algorithmic curation of our lives. A world polished to a sheen, devoid of the beautiful flaws that define us. Blackwood was simply ahead of his time, chasing a sterile perfection that is now a common, banal aspiration, cold perfection. His work forces us to confront the unnerving emptiness that lies at the heart of a world without the grace of error. The public saw only the breathtaking results, the foundation of his legacy, They did not see the chilling methods. They saw gods carved from stone, not the sacrifices laid upon the altar of their creation. For every masterpiece that left his studio, a darker story was etched, one that remained hidden behind the marble facade. And it was this hidden process, this secret art behind perfection, that would ultimately consume him. What does a dead man have to say? And why, after 20 years of silence, would he say it to you? The question arrived for Dr. Evelyn Reed, the preeminent scholar on Aurelius Blackwood. For 2 decades, she had studied the void he left behind, deconstructing the legacy of a man who could make cold stone feel impossibly, unnervingly alive. On a Tuesday morning in late October, a courier delivered a thick vellum envelope to her university office. The wax seal, bearing Blackwood's intricate monogram, was brittle and yellowed with age, cracking like ancient bone under her touch. The letter inside was no forgery. It was his hand, his ink, dated 20 years prior. It was a posthumous invitation, an artifact held in stasis by his solicitors to be delivered only upon definitive proof of his death. The message was a siren call to an academic soul, an offer to be the first and only person to witness and catalog his final secret collection, a body of work he called the pinnacle of all creation, the final form. Blackwood's script was precise, almost surgical, yet it hummed with a chilling fervor. He wrote of transcending the limits of stone, of capturing not just life, but the very blueprint of perfection itself. But how does one possibly catalog perfection? What vocabulary could ever contain the absolute? The obsession with a flawless final product is not unique to a vanished artist. In our digital age, we endlessly curate our own perfect legacies, filtering and editing our lives until the flawed, authentic reality is erased. Dr. Reed understood the profound risks. Blackwood's genius was entwined with a dark and unsettling obsession, the gilded cage from her own books. To accept was to step into the mystery he had built, a place from which he never returned. The invitation was an echo from a tomb, and she began composing her reply. How does a vibrant, living home decay into a tomb? The iron gates of the Blackwood estate, choked with ivy, groaned open for Dr. Evelyn Reed, a single protesting shriek that had not been heard for 20 years. She stepped from her car onto a gravel path now almost entirely consumed by defiant weeds and thorny brambles, the air heavy with the sweet, cloying scent of rot and forgotten roses. The silence was not peaceful. It was a physical presence, a weight that pressed in from all sides, broken only by the unnerving crunch of her own solitary footsteps on the neglected drive. This was more than just abandonment. It was a calculated surrender, a testament to an artist's complete withdrawal from the world he once dominated. The Grand Manor stood as a hollowed-out monument to his fame from the late 1980s, its windows dark and vacant. Inside, she knew, lay furniture shrouded in 2 decades of dust, every surface a gray canvas of time itself. The gilded cage had become a literal one, its bars rusted shut by choice. The art of perfection. This was the place where Aurelius Blackwood had decided to stop time, to let his legacy become a ghost story whispered among academics and collectors. But her destination was not the house. Her gaze was fixed on the structure at the far end of the property, a stark, brutalist monolith of concrete and steel that stood in jarring opposition to the decaying elegance of the estate. The studio. It had no windows, no visible adornments, just a single imposing metal door. It was a vault. What obsessive, feverish work had unfolded within those walls, shielded from every ray of natural light and the judgment of the outside world? This was the crucible where he had pursued his chilling vision alone. This relentless quest for an impossible standard is not a relic of a bygone artist's madness. We feel its echo today in the endless scroll of curated lives, a quiet, pervasive pressure to airbrush our own realities into something flawless. Dr. Reed stood before the studio door, the single ornate iron key feeling impossibly cold in her hand. It was the key to the final collection, the final act. The lock was stiff, resisting her at first, but then the tumblers turned with a deep, resonant clunk that seemed to echo from the very heart of the building. She knew that crossing this threshold meant leaving the known world of Aurelius Blackwood behind, for whatever lay beyond this door was not merely art, but the terrible, beautiful answer to a 20-year silence. How much of a soul must be sacrificed for perfect art? Inside the cavernous studio, the air was thick with dust and a faint, sweet smell like old candles. Dr. Evelyn Reed pulled back a heavy canvas, her breath catching in the silence. Before her stood not the cold marble she had studied for 2 decades, but a figure of impossible vitality. The realism far surpassed Blackwood's celebrated work from the 1980s. Every pore, every strand of hair was rendered with a precision that felt less like craft and more like creation itself, the art of perfection. But the symmetry was too exact, a flawless, inhuman geometry imposed on a form that should be beautifully imperfect. This wasn't an evolution of his genius, it felt like a violation. How could something so beautiful also feel so deeply profane? The material was not stone. It had a strange, waxy quality, absorbing the weak light with an organic warmth, as if it held a memory of heat. It was as if Aurelius Blackwood had not merely carved a likeness of life, but had somehow arrested it. This chilling pursuit of flawlessness echoes in our own digital age, where we chase an algorithmic perfection that erases the very humanity we seek to capture. Evelyn leaned closer, her academic composure finally breaking. She saw it then, a tiny mark beneath the figure's ear. It was not a sculptor's tool mark, it was a scar. How does a mind begin to unravel on paper? Beneath a loose floorboard in his private study, Evelyn Reed's fingers brushed against cold leather. The journals, a stack of 10, felt heavy, dense with secrets. The ink smelled sharp, an obsessive scent clinging to the brittle pages. These were not the ramblings of a recluse, but the precise, methodical logbooks of a descent. The first entries, dated from the late 1980s, revisit the triumphs the world celebrated. But to Aurelius Blackwood, they were monuments to his own failure. He saw only the coldness of the stone, the lifelessness he could never quite overcome. The words seethed with a profound, almost violent dissatisfaction with his own genius. The pages turned from prose to a frantic litany of complaints. Marble was a stubborn deadness, he wrote. Clay offered only a fragile mockery of life. He saw his masterpieces not as achievements, but as hollow shells, the perfect form. He was a man drowning in his own acclaim, desperate for a material that would not betray the vitality he envisioned. His search was not for a better stone, but for something else entirely, something that could hold a pose not just through craft, but through its very nature. But when the known world offers no suitable canvas, where does a master turn? The journals offered a terrifying answer, shifting from artistic theory to something clinical, something colder. The elegant script gives way to dense anatomical sketches. They are rendered with an unsettling surgical precision that Dr. Reed had never seen in his public work. He diagrams the flex of a bicep, the delicate curve of the human spine, and the intricate webbing of connective tissue. These are not studies for a sculptor, they are blueprints. He writes of a new medium, one he sought with a terrifying zeal, a material he described as possessing a pliable permanence, something that could capture the warmth of life and hold it forever. His obsession mirrors our own age's relentless quest for digital and physical perfection, a drive that often blurs the line between creation and violation. This pursuit of the flawless form is not a relic of the past. It lives in our algorithms and aspirations. The final entry in the third journal contains a single chilling phrase that points toward a terrifying new direction in his work. What if the line between imitation and creation was completely erased? Evelyn Reed stood before a piece titled "The Final Chord." It was only a single hand, impossibly delicate, resting on an unseen keyboard. The faint, sweet smell from the studio air seemed stronger here. She ran a gloved finger over a knuckle, feeling a texture not of marble, but of something colder, smoother, with a strange, almost imperceptible give. The journals had spoken of a new medium, a crystalline resin that captured life. Empty words, lunatic ravings. But here, under the weak afternoon light, the material wasn't truly opaque. It was faintly translucent. She retrieved her jeweler's loupe, a habit from decades of authenticating artifacts. Pressing the lens to the sculpture's index finger, her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't a pattern of mineral inclusion. It was a lattice, a perfect, horrifyingly familiar network of preserved cellular structure. The art of perfection. This was not a representation of a hand. It was a ghost of one, captured in a state beyond life or death. The chilling scrawls in Blackwood's journals suddenly gained a terrible weight, transforming from the poetry of a madman into the lab notes of a monster. How could he have possibly achieved this? In our own era, we chase biological perfection through gene editing and synthetic biology, blurring the lines of what it means to be human. Aurelius Blackwood's work stands as a dark precursor, a warning against the hubris of creation. Evelyn pulled back, her mind truly racing. The entire studio was filled with these figures. She looked at the serene face of a nearby statue, its eyes closed in peaceful repose. If the hand was real, what else in this cold, silent room was once alive? What if a formula could not just represent life, but arrest it cold? The later journals felt different in Evelyn Reed's gloved hands. The script, once a controlled architect's hand, devolved into a frantic scrawl, the ink bleeding slightly into the brittle, yellowed paper. The sweet, cloying scent she had first noticed in the studio seemed to rise from these pages, a chemical perfume of obsession. Blackwood's elegant notes on proportion and form vanished, replaced by complex molecular diagrams and chemical equations that pushed the very boundaries of known science. He was no longer trying to imitate life, he was trying to trap it. He called his creation petrifactin. It was a disquieting formula, a bespoke polymer resin engineered to achieve what he termed divine stasis. His notes describe, with unnerving clarity, a process of total cellular permeation. The compound would, in theory, replace every molecule of water in living tissue, suspending it in a state of perfect, incorruptible permanence, an amber for flesh and bone. The art of perfection. But as the pages turned, his scientific detachment frayed, revealing a terrifying messianic fervor. How far must an artist go to capture a fleeting moment, not in an imitation of life, but within the very substance that lived it? This pursuit of permanence resonates today in our digital archives and genetic preservation, a modern echo of the same desperate desire to make the ephemeral eternal. His first successful test is detailed with chilling pride. He describes a small finch found beneath a studio window, its neck broken from the impact. He applied the resin. Weeks later, he wrote, "The bird remained flawless, its feathers still iridescent, its tiny eyes gleaming as if with a spark of life that had been captured, not extinguished." Dr. Reed felt a sudden, profound sickness as the pieces clicked into place. The impossible detail of the final chord, the hand that felt too real, it wasn't a masterpiece of carving, it was a masterpiece of chemistry. The formula was a success. The final entry on that page, however, posed a new, terrifying question. But what is the ideal canvas? When does a pattern stop being a coincidence? The chill of Blackwood's disquieting formula settled on Evelyn Reed not as an academic puzzle, but as a cold premonition. The equations weren't just about arresting life, they were a blueprint. A terrible, gnawing suspicion took root. She put aside the journals. She began a new, grim line of inquiry. She drove to the regional archive, a place of dust and forgotten histories. The air in the archive was thick with the scent of decaying paper. Under the weak glow of a single desk lamp, Evelyn's gloved fingers traced the brittle columns of a 1991 newspaper, the faint crackle of the page echoing in the profound silence. She cross-referenced the date Blackwood marked the completion of the final chord, June 3rd, with the local missing persons reports from that same week. And there it was, a single entry, a small name in a sea of forgotten text. A local musician, a pianist named Alastair Finch, last seen on June 2nd. He had simply vanished. One data point could be a fluke, a tragedy, but unrelated. But Evelyn felt a cold certainty coiling in her gut. She pulled another journal, The Price of Perfection. She worked for days. The dates from Blackwood's journals became a litany of dread. The completion of The Silent Orator in 1993 aligned perfectly with the disappearance of a traveling debater. The Weaver's Rest from 1995 corresponded to the day a young seamstress failed to return home. Could the obsessive pursuit of an ideal truly lead a mind to commit such unspeakable acts? The pattern was no longer a suspicion, it was a horrifying tapestry woven from dates and names. Each sculpture was not a creation, it was a memorial, a tombstone carved before the victim was even gone. This obsession with capturing the perfect form was not an artistic quirk, it was a predator's methodology. Today, our digital lives leave a constant trail of data, a map of our movements and desires. But Blackwood's archive was analog, written in ink and filed away on paper, a chilling testament to how monstrous intentions can hide in the quiet, unexamined records of the past. Evelyn's blood ran cold. The correlation was undeniable. Every masterpiece had a ghost. And now she had to look again at the very first sculpture in that studio, The Gardener's Daughter, and ask herself, who exactly vanished in the spring of 1989? The formula was a key, but what door did it truly unlock? Behind a vast tapestry depicting Icarus, Evelyn's hand found a cold spot on the stone wall. A faint click, a groan of hidden veers, and a rectangle of absolute darkness yawned open. A draft of frigid, unmoving air, carrying that same faint, sweet scent from the studio, washed over her, a smell she now understood as chemical, not wax. This was no studio, it was a showroom, a silent theater of the damned. Entire tableaus of life were staged under cold, recessed lights. A man in a chair, a newspaper from 1992 forever unread, a mother and child playing with wooden blocks, their laughter eternally silenced. They were not marble. The texture was wrong, the detail too perfect. The skin held the waxy, translucent quality she had seen on the hand of the final chord. And then, the faces. Evelyn's blood ran cold. She knew them all. The sharp jawline of the missing journalist, the gentle eyes of the young pianist from the police files, everyone a ghost from her research. A silent audience of the lost. Was this the ultimate expression of an artist's control, or the final monstrous act of a predator? Blackwood had not been imitating life, he had been harvesting it. The disquieting formula was not a recipe for a new kind of stone, but for a new kind of tomb. Perfect stillness. Our own age is obsessed with freezing moments, curating perfect memories on a screen for all to see. We filter and pose, striving for an idealized stillness that Blackwood achieved with terrifying, absolute finality. His perfection was not an illusion, it was an abduction. Evelyn backed away, her light catching on the nameplate of the nearest scene, Sunday morning. Then she saw it. At the far end of the gallery, one final platform stood shrouded, with a single empty chair placed before it, as if waiting for its final silent critic. Where does an artist's studio end and a surgeon's theater begin? Behind the final statue in the silent gallery, Evelyn Reed's hand found a hidden seam. A wall section receded with a quiet, pneumatic hiss, releasing air not of clay, but of ozone and sharp, sterile chemicals. This was no alchemist's den, it was a laboratory. Under cold fluorescent lights, gleaming steel tables held surgical instruments arranged with terrifying precision. Along one wall, 3 enormous glass vats hummed, their viscous fluid agitated by silent pumps. This was the physical engine for the disquieting formula from his journals, the clinical heart of Aurelius Blackwood's monstrous process, the art of perfection. Here, in this pristine, terrifying space, he had moved beyond imitation. He had achieved preservation. How could a man who coaxed such life from marble also harbor the cold precision of a vivisectionist? This unholy marriage as art and brutal science feels unervingly present in our own era's relentless quest to conquer biology, to edit and perfect life until it fits an artificial ideal. We too risk mistaking control for creation. Evelyn's light swept across a workbench and found a leather ledger lying open. It listed names and dates next to columns of chillingly precise chemical measurements. The final name on the list was one she recognized from the Missing Persons Archive, but beside it, the last column was ominously blank. How does a genius justify the act of murder? The Seventh Journal from 1991 holds the answer. In cold script, Blackwood details the last days of his gardener's boy. He recalls watching him tend roses near the West Terrace, a perfect, fleeting specimen of human youth. Blackwood notes the boy's chipped tooth and soil beneath his nails, not as flaws, but as transient details he was duty-bound to preserve. There is no confession of guilt, instead, a chilling manifesto. Blackwood sought time as the ultimate vandal, a crude force of decay, and he, the artist, was its only adversary. He wasn't killing the boy, he was immortalizing a perfect form. He would be saved from the indignities of age, elevated into perpetual, silent grace. The formula Evelyn Reed had found was his tool of preservation, a chilling exploitation. The text shifts from poetic justification to a procedural account with terrifying speed. He details the precise mixture of the chemical bath, the temperature needed to arrest cellular decay without discoloration. He describes the process as one might describe priming a new canvas. Was this the work of a madman, or the ultimate terrifying expression of an artistic ego that viewed other humans as mere raw material? This dark obsession with arresting time echoes uncomfortably in our modern world. We too seek to freeze our best moments, filtering out the imperfections of a life fully lived. For Dr. Evelyn Reed, reading those words in that sterile laboratory, the true horror was realizing Blackwood wasn't insane. He was following his philosophy to its most monstrous and logical conclusion. He called him Subject Number 1. The final line is simple, devoid of all emotion. The preservation was a complete success. The marble now holds him perfectly. This clinical victory implied a terrifying continuation. If the gardener's boy was the first successful subject, who was next in line for Blackwood's terrible, perfect salvation? How does a predator hunt for humans in plain sight? He doesn't. He builds a beautiful cage and waits. After the gardener's boy, Aurelius Blackwood realized the crudeness of his method. The risk was too great. Evelyn Reed discovered the chilling evolution in his 8th journal, its pages filled not with chemical equations, but with meticulous business plans. He created a phantom organization, the Aurelian Grant for Emerging Artists. It was a brilliant deception, a silken web spun from his immense wealth and reputation, designed to attract the exact specimens his formula required. He wasn't a monster hiding in the shadows. He was a celebrated patron, a savior in the light of day. Evelyn could almost see a hopeful dancer stepping off a bus in the nearby town, clutching a letter bearing Blackwood's official crest. The young man would have seen the grand estate not as a place of grim isolation, but as a sanctuary where his art, his very essence, would be understood and immortal. He was promised a lead role in a new kind of performance art. The journals detail the careful grooming, the letters filled with effusive praise and promises of a fame to echo through centuries, art and obsession. Blackwood targeted the invisible dreamers. They were runaways, fringe artists, and wanderers with talent but no social safety net. People whose disappearance might not be noticed for months or even years. Was it the money that truly ensnared them, or was it the intoxicating whisper of forever, the chance to be remembered long after their brief, anonymous lives had faded? He offered them legal contracts, paid for their transport, and assured them their sacrifice would be for the sake of a perfect beauty the world had never before witnessed. This craving for permanence, a legacy that defies oblivion, echoes loudly in our own digital age. We curate our lives for an audience, chasing a fleeting immortality in pixels and posts, hoping to leave a perfect image that will last. Blackwood simply offered a more tangible and far more terrifying version of that same desperate human promise. His notes detail each subject's arrival, but one entry stands apart, circled in red ink, a name Evelyn recognized not from a missing persons file, but from the art world itself. How does one stop time inside a living cell? Aurelius Blackwood's journals reveal the answer was not in art, but in horrifying chemistry. He called it vitrium fluoride, or flowing glass. It was a synthetic polymer solution, a liquid catalyst designed for a monstrous purpose. In his lab, beneath a single humming bulb, he would watch the viscous, clear fluid travel down an intravenous line. The soft whir of the perfusion pump was the only sound, a steady, mechanical heartbeat for a life about to be arrested in its final pose. The formula, once introduced into the bloodstream, began its silent, systematic conquest. It wasn't a poison that destroyed, it was a replacement that perfected. The polymer molecules, as Evelyn Reed deciphered, were engineered to bond with proteins, displacing water and cross-linking cellular structures into a rigid, permanent matrix. Every cell, every membrane, every delicate vessel was filled and solidified. It was petrification on a microscopic scale. the art of perfection. But how could it preserve the lifelike color, the faint blush on a cheek, the very glint in an eye? The polymer contained light refractive nanoparticles that mimicked the exact optical properties of living tissue, trapping the final moment's hue forever. Was this science, or was it a form of mummification perfected for an audience of one? This process, a twisted forerunner of modern plastination, demonstrates a mastery of biochemistry that remains unsettling today. The pursuit of perfect preservation constantly pushes the ethical boundaries of what we do with the human form after death. Blackwood wasn't just killing his subjects, he was rewriting their biology into a terrible permanence. His notes, however, also spoke of instability, of early attempts where the chemistry failed. The next journal promised to reveal the grotesque horrors of his first imperfect creations. What is the sound of a perfect crime? It is the absolute absence of sound itself. Dr. Evelyn Reed stood in the second gallery, surrounded by Blackwood's silent audience. She stamped her foot, a sharp, impulsive act, but the report vanished, swallowed by thick velvet. There was no echo, no reverberation, just a dead, final thud that the air greedily consumed. This studio was a vacuum, a pocket of dead physics, where the very rules of acoustics were meticulously murdered. The silence wasn't empty, it was heavy, a suffocating pressure against her eardrums. Perfect silence. The later journals hinted at this, but never stated it outright. The vitrium fluoride, his horrifying preservative, had a secondary, unwritten property. Its complex molecular lattice, designed to halt decay, also formed a perfect anechoic surface. It trapped sound waves, converting their energy into infinitesimal vibrations within the statues themselves. Blackwood hadn't just petrified his victims, he weaponized their very forms to enforce a total, suffocating quiet. Could a creator's obsession extend so far that he would command not just the image of life, but the sound waves that animate our world? He built a tomb that entombed sound itself. This effect is not unknown to modern science. Anechoic chambers today push the boundaries of quiet, driving people to auditory hallucinations as their brains struggle to process the void. Blackwood built his by 1991, not for research, but for dominion. It's a chilling reminder that the quest for control often begins by silencing the world around us. In this crushing quiet, Evelyn finally heard it. Not a sound from the statues, but a sound from deep within one. A faint, rhythmic, and utterly impossible pulse, a ghost of a heartbeat still beating in the stone. How deep can loyalty run before it becomes a crime? Leaving the sterile silence of the second gallery, Evelyn Reed followed a faint wisp of wood smoke to a small stone cottage nearly swallowed by the overgrown gardens. She knocked, the sound unnaturally loud in the dead air, and the door creaked open on a man whose face was a roadmap of wrinkles, his loyalty to Blackwood etched into every line. He was the estate's caretaker, its sole resident for 30 years, a silent witness. He spoke not of a murderer, but of a misunderstood master. His testimony was a chilling tapestry of willful ignorance. He remembered the unmarked vans that arrived in the dead of night, carrying not blocks of Carrara marble, but sloshing chemical drums for what Blackwood called his vitrium fluoride. He saw patrons arrive in gleaming cars for their sittings, stepping into the studio with hope in their eyes, never to be seen again. He saw it all, and he questioned none of it. How can a man witness the mechanics of a slaughterhouse and see only the architecture of a holy cathedral? He called it divine work, a sacred process of elevation, the price of perfection. He insisted Blackwood brought a profound peace to those he chose, granting them an incorruptible eternity the dying world outside could never offer. they were not victims, they were acolytes. This stunning devotion, this cultivated blindness to horror, is not a relic of some distant Gothic past. It is the same quiet, fervent complicity that allows modern-day prophets and charismatic innovators to build empires on rationalized cruelty, where followers fiercely protect the creator's vision at any human cost. The caretaker's voice lowered, a dry whisper of a confession. He told Evelyn of one final patron, a woman who arrived in the autumn of 1999, a subject whose unique transformation was interrupted, never finished, and whose powerful family name he now revealed for the very first time. Perfection is a mask, but every mask has a crack. For weeks, Dr. Evelyn Reed walked among the silent audience of the second gallery, accepting Blackwood's chillingly perfect narrative. He wrote of peaceful passage, of subjects willingly embracing his vitrium fluere, his supposed gift of static immortality. The statues seemed to agree. Their faces were placid, their poses serene, a composed chorus of silent acceptance. But in the cold, pre-dawn light, her flashlight beam caught an anomaly on a statue titled The Poet. His face was turned upward in supposed ecstasy, but his left hand, resting on his knee, told a different, violent story. It was not relaxed. It was a fist, clenched with such force the petrified knuckles were sharp, white peaks. A single muscle in his jaw was a rigid cord, a final, futile act of defiance against the inevitable, the flaw in perfection. This was not peace. This was not transcendence. This was a man fighting for his last breath, aware of the horror consuming him. How could a man as meticulous as Blackwood, a monster obsessed with every detail, allow this single, screaming testament of terror to remain? Perhaps it wasn't a mistake. Perhaps it was a boast, a private signature on his masterpiece of cruelty, hiding the visceral truth in plain sight. This one imperfection recontextualized everything. It proved the lie at the heart of Blackwood's entire philosophy. We still fall for this illusion today, seduced by flawless surfaces presented to us, rarely questioning the hidden strains required to maintain them. We accept the narrative without checking the hands for a clenched fist. Dr. Reed now understood with terrible clarity. She was not just looking at victims, she was looking at witnesses. And if this one statue contained a hidden dissent, it begged a terrifying question. What other secrets were the dead waiting to tell? Can a metaphor become a confession? Before vanishing, Blackwood faced one final, scathing review. We return to 1991. In a cramped office smelling of old paper and ink, the critic, Julian Croft, stared at a photograph of Blackwood's work, his pen scratched, struggling to capture the statue's unnerving vitality, its predatory perfection, the living stone. Croft's review was dismissed as jealousy. He wrote that Blackwood's art was so lifelike, it felt as though he has stolen the very souls of his subjects to animate the stone. The line was a poetic barb, damning prose. But for Dr. Evelyn Reed, finding the yellowed clipping in the study, the words are not poetry. They are a witness statement, typed years too early. The truth was published for the world, but no one would read it. It was simply too monstrous to be believed. Everyone else saw genius. Only Croft sensed the void beneath the beautiful surface. How can one man see a monster, describe it perfectly, and be accused of mere professional envy? It is a chilling reminder that sometimes the most outlandish claims hide the most unpalatable truths, a lesson we still fail to heed in our era of information. Evelyn rereads the sentence, the paper trembling in her hand. The words, once ignored, are now a terrifying roadmap into Blackwood's mind. The critic's prophecy was there, hiding in plain sight. And in the final paragraph, Croft mentioned one more thing, an imperceptible flaw he noticed in the marble iris of every statue, a detail that sends Evelyn racing back toward the silent audience in the second gallery. What is the final shape of a monster's ambition? For Dr. Evelyn Reed, it was not a sculpture, but a map. It was hidden in the one place Blackwood knew she would eventually look, inside a false backing of Julian Croft's framed scathing review from 1991, a final, bitter joke from beyond the grave. Her gloved fingers found a heavy cylinder of vellum, and she unrolled it across a vast drafting table. The brittle paper crackled like dry leaves in the studio's oppressive silence, releasing the faint, sharp scent of old India ink and slow decay. The document was an architectural plan of breathtaking, maddening detail. At the top, in Blackwood's severe, precise hand, was a single, arrogant word: ascension. It was his magnum opus, a grand tableau depicting a spiral of human forms reaching toward an unseen zenith, a frozen ballet of forced transcendence. The design called for 12 figures, 12 unique subjects, each with their own codename and precise position noted in the margins, each essential to the work's terrible symmetry. This was not just a sculpture, it was a theology written in stone and bone, the ultimate, horrifying application of his vitrium fluore process, a monument to his victory over death itself. Evelyn's blood ran cold. She began the terrible arithmetic, her mind racing back through the estate's hidden galleries. The gardener's boy, designated the seed, the 7 patrons from the silent audience, the benefactors. That made 8. 8 souls captured, preserved, and displayed. But the blueprint, this cold testament to his final vision, demanded 12. Where then were the other 4 figures meant to complete this ghastly composition? Were they hidden somewhere else on this cursed estate, waiting in an undiscovered room? Or were they still out in the world, their disappearances written off as tragic, unsolved mysteries? The empty pedestals on the diagram seemed to mock her. 4 silent voids in a perfect, horrifying pattern. A chilling art. This obsession with a flawless assembly where lives are reduced to components echoes disturbingly in our own world's relentless drive for optimization, for data-perfect systems that forget the human cost. Blackwood's art is a chilling parable for any pursuit that values the finished product over the humanity required to create it. With the blueprint clutched in her hand, its paper cool against her skin, Evelyn realized her work was not about documenting a madman's past. It was about finding his remaining victims and finally giving them a name. The journals gave his words, but what of his actual voice? In the sterile laboratory, behind a cabinet of chemical reagents, Evelyn Reed found a locked metal box. The key, taped under a shelf, turned with a stiff grind. Inside, not more formulas, but 24 reel-to-reel audio tapes, each labeled with just a number. She threaded the first one onto a dusty machine. A click, a low hum, then a hiss of magnetic tape. And then the voice of Aurelius Blackwood, impossibly calm and clear. He was not confessing, he was teaching. His tone was that of a patient professor explaining a complex theorem to his favored student, the unconscious subject on the table before him. He spoke of liberating them from the tyranny of decay, of the messy, imperfect process of living. He called it an elevation, a transition to a higher state of being, the art of perfection. He explained how the vitrium fluore would arrest their fleeting beauty, making it eternal forever. His voice never wavered, a placid river flowing over unspeakable horrors. "You see," the voice on the tape murmured, "pain is temporary. But this is forever." How can a man describe the petrification of a human soul as an act of profound kindness? This was the missing piece, the chilling philosophy that fueled the chemistry. His obsession with stopping time wasn't madness in his mind, it was a sacred duty. Today, we curate our digital lives into perfect static galleries, freezing our best moments against the tide of time. Blackwood simply took that impulse to its most monstrous, logical conclusion. But the label on the very last tape made Evelyn's blood run cold, promising a very different kind of lecture. What is the sound of a monster's confession? It is not a scream, but a gentle whisper. In the sterile chill of the laboratory, Dr. Evelyn Reed pressed play on the old cassette player. A low hiss filled the silence, followed by a mechanical click, and then a voice emerged from the magnetic tape. This was the voice of Aurelius Blackwood, a voice she had only imagined from his frantic journals. It was calm, rational, and utterly serene. He spoke not of murder, but of artistry. He described his subjects as willing participants in a grand artistic statement, people he was liberating from the inevitable decay of the flesh. He was not a killer. He was, in his own words, a savior. The perfect end. His words painted a horrifyingly clear picture. He saw life as a flawed sculpture, cracking and fading with every passing year. He believed his work was a mercy, a final perfect brushstroke that arrested the slow, messy process of living. He was preserving beauty, not destroying life. How does a mind become so warped that it sees an act of ultimate violation as an act of supreme kindness? His logic was a chilling, airtight cage of self-delusion. Evelyn felt its cold bars closing around her as she listened, hearing not madness, but a terrifying, unshakable conviction in every single syllable. Blackwood called his vitrium fluor formula the true artist's medium, a final paint that did not just capture a moment, but made it eternal. The silent audience in the second gallery was not a collection of victims. To him, they were a pantheon of perfected souls. This obsession with arresting time, with curating a flawless, unchanging image, echoes in our own modern world's desperate flight from aging and imperfection. We see his madness reflected, albeit faintly, in our own digital mirrors. But then, the voice on the tape shifted. A new warmth entered his tone as he spoke of a name Evelyn had never seen in any journal, a name he called his true masterpiece. What is the perfect form of revenge? Not destruction, but absorption. In the lab's sterile silence, Dr. Evelyn Reed reached the final journal. Its last pages were bound by a brittle wax seal stamped with Blackwood's signet. The seal broke, releasing a faint, dry scent of old paper and ambition. The script inside was not frantic, but the cold, precise hand of an architect finalizing his ultimate design. He listed the 11 names, confirming ghosts she had already met in archives. They were pillars for his grand work, but the masterpiece required a capstone, the final piece. The 12th entry was dated 2 days after his disappearance. The ink was darker, pressed into the page with a final weight. It was not a drifter, not a seeker of immortality. It was a name Evelyn recognized with a jolt colder than marble: Arthur Croft, the celebrated art critic, the man whose words called his work a gilded tomb before Blackwood vanished. Croft disappeared a month later, rumored to have retired, never to be heard from again. How does an artist answer his harshest critic? Blackwood's answer was not a rebuttal, but an eternal, silent testament. He would make the man who called his art lifeless its most lifelike piece. It was the ultimate act act of control, a chilling fusion of ego and vengeance. He would turn his greatest detractor into the crown of his opus, forever silencing the voice that questioned his perfection. This need to consume one's critics is a dark impulse that has not vanished. We see this desire play out today, not with scalpels, but with digital campaigns meant to bury a dissenting voice. The final piece. Blackwood wanted to possess the very idea of his dissent. Evelyn now saw the ascension for what it was, a monument not to life, but to an ego's victory over criticism. Now she had to find where he placed his final, terrible prize. How does a single review become a death sentence? Before the laboratory and the disquieting formula, there was a war waged not with weapons, but with ink and paper. The final wax-sealed journal Evelyn Reed opened, the one detailing the 12th subject, begins not with a name, but with a quote. It is a line from the critic Arthur Croft. Croft was the era's most feared artistic arbiter, a man whose prose could build a reputation or bury it beneath an avalanche of eloquent disdain. For years, he had shadowed Blackwood's career, acknowledging his technical genius while simultaneously chipping away at its core, calling it a hollow spectacle, a chilling perfection. The journals pinpoint the exact moment the feud turned venomous. It was the winter of 1991, at a retrospective in a sterile London gallery. Croft, surrounded by admirers, pointed a thin finger at Blackwood's The Weeping Angel. "It is a marvel of anatomy," he announced, his voice a crisp, surgical instrument of dismissal, "but it is the anatomy of a beautiful corpse, perfect and utterly, irrevocably dead." Blackwood's journal entry from that night is a single, jagged sentence, underlined 3 times. He says, "I have no soul to give my work. I will show him a soul." That one public condemnation became the central obsession of Blackwood's remaining life. The accusation of being soulless was a brand seared into his pride, a wound that festered into a grotesque new purpose. How could he prove the life in his art if the art itself was not truly alive? The journals show his logic twisting into a horrifying syllogism. If his hands could not create a soul, then they would have to learn how to capture one. The vitrium fluor was not just a preservative, it was his rebuttal. Each member of his silent audience became a testament, a captured soul to refute Croft's damning prophecy. The critic's damning metaphor had become the artist's literal, monstrous blueprint. This toxic dance between creator and critic still echoes in the digital arenas of today, where anonymous judgment can fuel obsession and derail genius. It is a stark reminder that behind every creation is a human ego, sometimes fragile enough to fracture in the most terrifying ways. As Dr. Evelyn Reed cross-references the dates in the journal with public records, a cold, dreadful certainty replaces suspicion. The timeline of Arthur Croft's sudden, unexplained disappearance aligns perfectly with the chilling preparations for Blackwood's final and most personal masterpiece. It is not what is present that defines a masterpiece, but what is terrifyingly absent. Following the blueprint from the critic's portrait, Evelyn unsealed the final chamber. The air hummed. She stood before the tableau Blackwood called Ascension. 11 figures, skin gleaming with vitrium fluor, reached in a silent chorus toward a central point. They were his patrons, his subjects, a frozen audience forced into his ultimate performance. But the center was a void. A single polished marble pedestal stood empty under a focused light, reflecting the figures around it. This was the flaw Julian Thorne had prophesied, made literal. It was the punchline to a decades-long feud. Blackwood had built his monument to revenge, but its heart was missing. The art of perfection. After all the planning and monstrous justification in his journals, how could he fail at the final step? The 12th journal was explicit. Julian Thorne was to be the centerpiece, the final note in this symphony of horror. Blackwood's revenge was not just to kill his enemy, but to absorb him, to make him a permanent fixture in the legacy he mocked. This obsession with curating one's narrative, erasing dissent, feels terrifyingly familiar today. All of Evelyn Reed's work led to this chilling truth. Aurelius Blackwood had failed. The empty pedestal was not a choice. It was a testament to his impotence. The masterpiece was incomplete, leaving one final question. What is the final word of a man who believes he has become a god? In the last journal, Evelyn Reed found it, a sealed envelope, its wax stamp cold and unbroken. The address was not a name, but a title, "To the one who understands." This was no confession. It was a coronation, a final testament written not in regret, but in chilling arrogance. He saw his life's work not as a series of crimes, but as a symphony building to its final, silent crescendo. He wasn't explaining the past, he was meticulously dictating the future of his perfect art. The art of perfection. In elegant script, the letter explains that the silent audience is merely a prelude. He argued that perfection cannot be observed, it must be inhabited. His vitrium fluor could arrest life, but it could not capture the spark of comprehension he sought to immortalize. The collection, he argued, was a library of perfect moments, but it lacked a librarian. It needed a conscious mind, aware of its own preservation, to serve as the eternal curator and complete the circuit. But what kind of person would willingly become the centerpiece in a gallery of the dead? The letter is not a historical document. It is a live, terrifying recruitment. The ink formed a singular, horrifying realization. The journals, the galleries, the disquieting formula. It was all a test designed to find a true acolyte. He had built an intellectual labyrinth, and the prize for solving it was not truth, but an invitation. This quest for a successor, for an heir to a monstrous vision, echoes in the darkest corners of our own age, where ideologies seek disciples willing to make the ultimate sacrifice. The letter, addressed to the one who understands, was always meant for the one who solved his final puzzle. The last page offered the key, a single, untraceable chemical compound, and an instruction for the empty pedestal, a promise not of death, but of a final, perfect stasis. What is a narcissist's ultimate self-portrait? Dr. Evelyn Reed's gloved fingers trembled, breaking the brittle wax seal. The single sheet of vellum inside unfolded with a dry whisper, releasing the faint scent of its creator's obsession. His looping script filled the page, not with confession, but a chilling manifesto. The letter confirmed her darkest theories, then shattered them into something far more monstrous. The critic, Arthur Croft, was never the intended centerpiece for that cold, empty pedestal in the final chamber. He was merely the overture, a final, symbolic sacrifice to consecrate the stage for the true masterpiece. Blackwood wrote of Croft not as a victim, but as the last impurity to be purged before true perfection could be achieved. He was the closing of one book, so another, more glorious one could be opened, the final piece. He called it his magnum opus, the culmination of his life's work, a final, perfect sculpture that would not just defy time, but conquer it. It was to be a monument not by Aurelius Blackwood, but a monument that was Aurelius Blackwood, rendered eternal by the very formula he had perfected on his silent audience. "They were my practice," he wrote, "the crude sketches for my own ascension." After a life spent capturing the fleeting essence of others in stone, what was left but to turn the chisel upon the only subject he revered? This was not art as imitation, but art as absorption, the ultimate act of self-possession. He sought to become the subject, the artist, and the medium all at once, a trinity of pure self-worship. By using the refined vitrium fluory, he would freeze his own image at the perceived peak of his genius. He would be forever immune to the decay of age, the shifting tides of taste, and the venomous sting of another critic's words. It was the chillingly logical endpoint for a man who saw other humans as mere clay. His ambition feels terrifyingly prescient in an age of curated digital selves and the relentless pursuit of a perfect online legacy. Blackwood's self-portrait is the analog precursor to the modern desire to freeze an idealized version of oneself for digital eternity. The letter laid out his philosophy, his justification, but it ended with one final, maddening command. It gave a date and a directive pointing not to the past, but to a terrifying future. What is the final canvas for a man who has conquered marble? Behind the Ascension tableau, a stone panel receded for Evelyn Reed with a pneumatic hiss. A low hum filled the space, the air thick with the scent of ozone and sterile chemicals. Her flashlight beam caught a web of glass tubing and polished steel, a monstrous inorganic spiderweb gleaming in the dark. This was not a studio, it was a chrysalis. At its heart sat a single throne-like chair, its harness of leather and steel awaiting an occupant. It was plumbed into a complex apparatus of silent automated pumps, precisely labeled chemical reservoirs, and whirring centrifuges. This was the engine for his vitrium fluory, but refined and scaled for a single, continuous automated application, an ark designed for one passenger. After preserving a dozen others against their will, what else remained but to turn the chilling art inward, to perfect the self? The journals, the statues, the letters, all were just elaborate footnotes to this, the final apparatus. This was Blackwood's true self-portrait, not a sketch on vellum, but a machine of immortality, the perfect form. This machinery, a testament to a god complex forged in the late 20th century, speaks to our own era's desperate technological grasp for eternal life. Its cold logic mirrors the cryonic fantasies of today's wealthiest visionaries. But the humming was not simply idle. A small chronometer on the central console was still active, its red numerals glowing, counting down to a date now terrifyingly close. What is the difference between a hum and a countdown? For Dr. Evelyn Reed, the distinction dissolved in the final chamber's sterile air. The low thrum of the apparatus felt like a predator's purr. She stood before the central console, a pane of dark glass set into cold steel, its surface cool through her glove. A series of digits glowed with a soft amber light. This was not a blueprint or a journal entry. This was a living mechanism. Her mind, trained to decipher 20-year-old clues and arcane formulas, overlooked the obvious. The display was not a diagnostic panel. It was a timer. She traced the glowing numbers with a trembling finger, the date confirming a horror she had not anticipated. October 26th, today. The time beneath it read 1700 hours. Less than 3 hours remained. All the journals, the tapes, the silent audience, they were all just preambled to this single ticking moment. How could a mind so attuned to the past be so blind to the immediate present? Perfect art, perfect death. The realization sent a jolt of ice through her veins. The machine's hum was not a sign of age, it was the sound of readiness. The network of tubes and reservoirs holding the vitrium fluoride were not merely stored, they were primed. Every valve was calibrated, every pressure gauge steady. Aurelius Blackwood did not just build his final masterpiece and walk away. He set its stage, arranged the lighting, and programmed the exact moment the curtain would rise on his ultimate self-portrait, with Evelyn as its sole intended audience. This is the ultimate trap of obsession. We become so immersed in deconstructing a monster's past that we fail to see the trap laid for our future. The puzzle itself becomes everything, blinding us to the fact that the final piece is meant for us. The amber digits on the screen were no longer just numbers. They were the final, silent syllables of Aurelius Blackwood's last word, a word that would be spoken in just a few short hours, not with sound, but with a chilling, perfect silence. How do you choose between two forms of certain destruction? The question hung in the humming air of the final chamber, heavier than the scent of ozone and chemicals. Dr. Evelyn Reed stood frozen, her phone a cold, useless weight in her palm. One call would bring the authorities. They were hours away. They would arrive with brute force and ignorance, treating this delicate, monstrous apparatus as a common bomb. They would rupture the lines of vitrium fluoride, destroying all the evidence, the art, and quite possibly the entire estate in a cloud of aerosolized poison. Blackwood had anticipated this. He had built a problem that the modern world, with all its procedures, was uniquely unqualified to solve. The alternative was a descent into madness. She could try to stop it herself. Evelyn, the academic who had only ever dissected Blackwood's life on paper, was now faced with its thrumming, lethal heart. The control panel was a constellation of unlabeled dials and cryptic lights, a language she could not speak. A single wrong switch could be a death sentence. It could accelerate the countdown or trigger a failsafe she couldn't even imagine. In a machine built for perfect preservation, what does failure even look like? This was the true test, the final, cruel art piece, an impossible choice. Blackwood had not built a machine. He had constructed a dilemma. He had weaponized the very act of decision-making itself. By presenting this choice, he was forcing Evelyn to become the final participant in his chilling exhibition. She was no longer just the biographer, she was the last critical component. This terrifying principle echoes in our own time, in the complex, opaque systems we build to manage our world. From financial markets to autonomous weaponry, we create mechanisms whose failure modes are beyond our prediction, forcing impossible choices upon those who must operate them. Every second that passed was another victory for a dead man. She stared at the digital timer, its red glow reflecting in her eyes. The numbers fell, relentless and serene. Then a memory surfaced, a fragment from the 20-second journal, a schematic she had skimmed over. It was a footnote on a secondary system, something about a primary coolant manifold. He had labeled it, in his precise script, the pacemaker. It was a detail so minor, so technical, she had dismissed it as irrelevant. Now it was the only thing in the world that mattered. Her hand, trembling, reached not for her phone, but for a single, unmarked lever near the base of the machine. What is the final defense of a perfect creation? Dr. Evelyn Reed, her breath catching in the dusty air of the main study, frantically unrolled the blueprints once more. Her gloved finger traced a faint secondary schematic she had initially dismissed as structural supports. A web of thermal conduits and chemical injectors, a vascular system of pure destruction woven into the studio's very bones. This was not an afterthought. It was the cold, beating heart of the design. Blackwood called it the Cinder Protocol in a small, meticulous annotation in the margin. It was a fail-safe of monumental arrogance. Any attempt to breach the final chamber's seal or interrupt the apparatus's sequence would trigger an immediate high-temperature incendiary event of unimaginable ferocity, powerful enough to turn marble to dust and evidence to ash. How could one man's obsession with permanence be so inextricably bound to the promise of total obliteration? The system was designed not to protect the art, but to punish the curious, to protect its integrity from the contaminating gaze of the unworthy. His notes were chillingly clear. A quote from his own journals: "The unworthy shall not inherit, they shall only provide the spark." The price of perfection. This possessive fury, this desire to control a legacy through its own destruction, persists today in digital deadman switches that wipe entire servers clean upon an owner's death. The countdown in the final chamber was a death sentence for one man. This discovery was a death warrant for the entire estate, for history itself, and most assuredly for her. The choice was no longer between two timers, but between two hells. What does a god do after his world is complete? He watches. After disarming the failsafe, Dr. Evelyn Reed's hand traced the cold metal interior of the preservation chamber. Her fingers snagged on a nearly invisible seam, a hairline crack where none should be. With a soft click, a section of the wall receded, revealing not more machinery, but a small, dark space beyond, utterly silent. The room was an ascetic cell. It held only a narrow cot with a single threadbare blanket and a small wooden desk. This Spartan simplicity was a stark, brutal contrast to the opulent horror of the estate. This was not a place of comfort. It was a place of vigil. The chamber's most profound feature was not what it contained, but what it looked out upon, a single, large pane of reinforced glass that served as a window. It offered a panoramic, godlike view of the second gallery, his silent garden of human statues, the 12 subjects he had perfected. A perfect end. He had built his own panopticon. From this hidden sanctum, Aurelius Blackwood could observe his collection, his life's work, without ever being seen. He was the ghost in his own machine. But was this a throne room or a cage? The answer lay in the oppressive silence, the lack of any personal effects. He had not retired here to admire his art. He had sequestered himself to guard it, a dragon hoarding a treasure of stolen souls, terrified of a single crack in the glass. This relentless pursuit of control, of maintaining a flawless facade, echoes in our own curated digital worlds, where we can become prisoners of the perfection we project. Dr. Reed saw Blackwood's final act wasn't just creation, it was a self-imposed eternal watch. And on the desk, waiting, lay one final, solitary object. What is the last testament of a man who believes he is a god? It is not a confession, but a coronation. In the sterile, humming light of the artist's sanctum, Dr. Evelyn Reed held the single sheet of vellum. The ink was a crisp, merciless black, Blackwood's signature, a final, arrogant flourish at the bottom of the page. His final words were not an apology for the 12 souls he had extinguished. They were a philosophical treatise, a blueprint for his own deification. He explained that his entire life's work, from the first chisel stroke in the 1980s to the silent audience in his secret gallery, was merely a prelude. His subjects were never victims in his eyes. They were simply the necessary, exquisite pigments for a canvas of unimaginable and eternal scale. He called it the final medium, the only material worthy of a true master. "Marble cracks and erodes," he wrote. "Bronze patinates and decays. But human flesh, perfected and arrested by his vitrium fluor, could achieve a sublime permanence. He argued that all great artists must sacrifice a part of themselves for their work, a piece of their soul for a masterpiece. He would simply be the first to sacrifice the whole. For Aurelius Blackwood, death was the ultimate artistic flaw, a messy, undignified, and unacceptable end to a creative force. Why should the creator be subject to the same decay as his lesser, inanimate creations? His chilling logic unfolded on the page, a perfect, terrifying syllogism of genius, ego, and chemistry. Art above all. This monstrous obsession with a flawless, curated eternity resonates with our own digital age, where we meticulously craft online personas we hope will outlive our mortal selves. What is the sound of a perfect trap springing shut? It begins not with a bang, but with a soft, definitive click. In the sanctum, a single relay closed, followed by the low, steady hum of capacitors charging. Dr. Evelyn Reed let out a breath. It was over. The automated sequence from his final mad letter had initiated. The timer had reached 0. She stood before the observation window as the preservation chamber illuminated with a cold, sterile light. In the silent room, articulated arms, tipped with gleaming needles, descended with pneumatic grace, poising above the central chair. But the throne was empty. The pedestal was bare. Blackwood was not there. His grand self-portrait, his ascension into art, was a fraud, a final, empty gesture from a ghost. The machine, however, did not stop. It continued its sequence, the atomizers beginning to hiss, the needles glinting with terrible purpose. A cold dread, sharper than any she had felt among the silent statues, began to crystallize in her chest. The letter. She reread it in her mind, his elegant script now twisting into a venomous sneer. To the one who understands. It was not an address, it was a label, it was a designation, a title for a specimen. The empty pedestal was not a failure of his plan. It was a canvas waiting for its subject. How could she have been so blind, so caught up in the intellectual chase that she never saw the bait for what it was? The ego she had studied for 2 decades, the monumental narcissism that fueled every chisel strike, would never allow itself to be the subject of a process it could not personally witness. The final piece. His chilling words from the tapes echoed back, no longer a confession, but a promise. Perfection requires a perfect witness. He had built this entire estate, the galleries, the journals, and the laboratory, as an elaborate lure. It was a perfectly constructed narrative maze designed for a single mind to solve. He didn't want to become his art. He wanted to curate its creation, to watch from his hidden perch as the ultimate tribute was rendered. He needed an audience of one, an expert who could appreciate every nuance of his genius, to become the final, definitive statement. This obsession with being understood, with having a curated self validated, echoes in our own digital age, where the performance for an unseen audience is everything. The final piece. The trap was never the chamber. The trap was her own obsession, the very expertise that brought her here. Blackwood's final, manipulative piece of performance art was not his own preservation. It was her discovery of it. The door to the sanctum slid shut with a soft, definitive hiss, the lock engaging with a heavy metallic thud. The lights in her observation room dimmed, leaving only the cold, humming glow of the chamber beyond the glass. And in that humming silence, Evelyn Reed finally understood the title of her own masterpiece. How does a monster's reign finally end? Not with a whisper, but a shout. Heavy boots hammered on marble, shattering 2 decades of stillness. Flashlight beams sliced the dark, finding the cold, perfect faces of Blackwood's silent audience. In the main gallery, an officer yelled, "Clear!" the sound alien against the stone, his light sweeping over a petrified poet. They found Dr. Evelyn Reed there, a soul in a gallery of the dead, the air thick with dust and cold night. The art of perfection. The officers were so unprepared. This was a crime scene posing as a museum. How does justice prosecute a ghost whose evidence is a gallery of masterpieces? The Vitrium Fluoré formula from the journals gave them a scientific process, but no human solace. It was a recipe for turning life into an object, a monument to pure obsession. They moved from the gardener's boy to the critic, each a perfect frozen scream. Each was an indictment. They found the artist's sanctum. The preservation chamber stood open, its interior empty and cold. Its timer, Evelyn had watched with dread, was dark, displaying a string of perfect zeros. The grand apparatus was inert. Blackwood's final act of ascension was a failure. This drive to cheat death, to sculpt a legacy into eternity, resonates today in our own age of digital ghosts and biological reinvention. The estate was sealed. The case of Aurelius Blackwood appeared closed. But as investigators cataloged the lab, they overlooked one detail: a faint etching on the chamber's inner door. How does a masterpiece die? Not with a crack, but with a yellow police tape. The Blackwood estate is now a tomb sealed by law. Its iron gates are chained shut, guarding a permanent crime scene, a monument to an obsession that consumed 12 lives. The world clamors for a glimpse at the horror, but the walls are silent. The art is now evidence. In the humming silence of the second gallery, a technician photographs subject number 7. The flash illuminates the gardener's boy for a report, his form now Exhibit A. Each piece, once a testament to genius, is now a cold file in a murder investigation. An unfinished masterpiece. The collection is a legal black hole. It cannot be studied as art or buried as human remains. But what do you call a collection of souls held in stasis, their final moments stolen for an art that can never be shown? They are caught between gallery and grave. Evelyn Reed's testimony provided the map, but the territory remains incomprehensible. Blackwood's quest was for a horrifying perfection. He sought to stop time with chemistry and a blade. In an age where we curate digital ghosts of ourselves, his monstrous pursuit of physical permanence feels less like fiction and more like a dark prophecy. The line between preservation and violation has never been thinner. The final chamber, its apparatus disarmed, is a silent stage for a play that was never performed. The ultimate subject, himself, never took his place. And so the collection waits in the dark, a testament to a vision that, in its final, crucial moment, was left forever unfinished. How does one write the final word on a monster? Months have passed. In her university office, lit only by a monitor's cold glow, Dr. Evelyn Reed types the official report on the Blackwood collection. Each keystroke feels like a chisel against bone, carving a truth too terrible for any museum plaque. The official documents, police reports, chemical analyses, victim statements, are stacked beside her, a cold monument to a dead man's ambition. They call it a collection, an estate, an artistic legacy, but Evelyn knows what it truly is. It is a mausoleum curated by a madman who saw people not as souls, but as raw material. The words she writes cannot capture the chilling dissonance of walking through those galleries. They cannot convey the sublime beauty of the statues, the impossible, lifelike detail that Aurelius Blackwood achieved with his vitrium fluoret. Nor can they articulate the profound violation of seeing it. Each piece is a testament to genius and a tombstone for a life stolen in its prime. The final chord, the silent audience. They are masterpieces of preservation and monuments to atrocity. The price of perfection. Every line of her report feels like a betrayal, either to the art or to the victims it consumed. Her greatest burden is the knowledge of the final unfinished piece. The empty pedestal was not an oversight, it was an invitation. The blueprints, the timed mechanism, the letter addressed to the curator, it was all a meticulously crafted trap. Blackwood did not just want an audience for his final act. He wanted a participant. He wanted the one person who understood his work most intimately to become its eternal guardian, frozen in place. Did he truly believe that such perfect art could justify the human cost of its creation? Evelyn's survival was an accident, a flaw in his otherwise perfect design. This is not a story confined to the past, sealed behind the yellow tape of the Blackwood estate. His obsession with a flawless, static ideal is a dark mirror to our own age, where we sacrifice authenticity for a curated, perfect image. We too are tempted to freeze moments, to edit out the flaws, to present a perfect version of life at the expense of living it. The chilling exploitation continues, just in a different medium. Her fingers hover over the keyboard, the cursor a blinking, insistent heartbeat in the dark. The report is almost finished, but the real questions remain unanswered, echoing in the silence of her office. What is the true price of perfection? And what becomes of us when art demands a human sacrifice?